Hello.
We need music.
We do. Well, I couldn't play the music today because Sean's not here, and he usually plays the music. So we could hum. Do-do-do-do-do. You could dance.
Yeah.
You don't want to do
I'm
that?
not a Baptist for no particular reason.
Welcome to the podcast. Tim's back. I think you were out last week or
I
last
was
time,
out
weren't you?
like 2 weeks.
Yeah,
Probably.
you
That's been a
slacker.
while. And then we were off a week, or we had to miss one.
That's right.
So
That's
I hadn't
right.
been here in almost a month.
Well, man, it's been peaceful without you here. Good to have you back. It's always good to have somebody to talk to. If you're out there watching, give us a thumbs up, comment, let us know you're there. Man, it is actually really helpful to us to know that people are out there. And even if you have questions or comments, it helps keep the conversation going. And we're not just, because we talk to each other all the time, and Tim's boring, and we kind of get, tired of each other. But we're going to be jumping right back into 1 Corinthians chapter 3. Hey, Crystal. See, Crystal's doing what she's told. She said she's here. I'm glad she's watching.
Well, she's been trained well.
I guess that's right. But we are going to jump into, she says you're boring. But we're going to jump into 1 Corinthians 3. But before I jump into it, it is March the 24th. We've got just a few days left on the March Madness Bible giveaway. I wish I could control the camera and show you, but I've got 539 Bibles sitting right off of Tim's right arm that have already come in for a church under the bridge. We've had some more donations come in this week, and hopefully maybe a few more, but you've got a few more days to get involved. We are also trying to help outfit their youth program. We had some extra funds come in, and so they meet with about 15 or 20 students at a restaurant in Tyler because they don't have a building.
Yeah.
So they meet at a different restaurant every Wednesday night, and they've got about 15 or 20, and Bibles are an issue. So we're also trying to help out with that. So I know there's a link in the description. It's cruciblesfire.org/donate. And since Sean's not here, I might be able to actually pull it up somewhere. I don't know. I'm sure it's on here where I can actually punch it in. Hey, look, watch this. There you go. Tell me I'm not a technical genius. But
You're not a technical genius.
easy now. We've been talking about maturity.
Well, and that's kind of what got us into
the whole discussion in the first place.
I mean, we'll probably end up actually going through all of 1 Corinthians, but we've been covering this theme sort of what is real eldership, maybe with a lowercase e. For the walking Christian, what does maturity mean?
And by way of clarity, when he says lowercase e, meaning not necessarily the office, but just someone who is mature, an elder in the faith in terms of maturity and longevity and experience and ability to discern.
Yeah. So, and then we got into Corinthians because he purposely writes a letter to these guys, and we've covered some of this, but just to get back where we are here, it's a new church. I don't know how long it had been. We could probably go back into Acts and figure out roughly what the time period here is. But even compared to Hebrews, who have a long history with God, and then even in the New Testament side where they have a long history with church and can compare things in the Old Testament and all that. And these guys don't have that. What I'm getting at is that he kind of comes in and chastises these new believers, and it's interesting to me because in Hebrews, I think around chapter 5 or so, these guys aren't really getting persecuted, but the church that the book of Hebrews is written to, they were getting some serious persecution, and he kind of comes at them at the same way.
Yeah. He does.
So it's interesting to me that
like in Hebrews, he's like, you should be teachers of the law, and here I am basically going over the ABCs with you still.
Yeah.
And
so, I can see it doing it to somebody with that kind of experience. If you're kind of whatever the reason is, you're just getting lazy or weak-kneed or scared or whatever it is. But he comes at these guys with the same kind of.
Well, when I was reading through that part here, it reminded me in a whole nother life. I used to work as an assistant counselor out at Sundown Ranch, and it was a drug rehab facility for adolescents primarily, but they went from age 12 to 24. Now, when you cross the 18-year-old barrier, things change legally and everything. And I would tell the clients, you know, they get their feelings hurt because they were developmentally, typically, if they've been doing drugs or been hooked, they're not on par with an 18 to 24-year-old that's not involved in those things developmentally in terms of maturity. However, they're legal adults. And they'd be like, well, why don't you treat this for that person? Why are they getting this treatment and I'm not? And I'm like, because you're an adult and we expect more out of you. Even if you don't know better, you ought to know better. And that was the flavor that I got from Paul to the Corinthian church.
And that's a really good, so I have a similar story. So the kids that I dealt with weren't having deficiencies or whatever it is they'd gone through in their life. In the Civil Air Patrol, so I had a leadership school for these guys, and the cadets that I would bring in to help teach the cadets we were going to do. This was a hard charging, serious school. Even for adults, I would tell you it was pretty tough. But I would bring those kids in, and they couldn't be instructors unless they were 17 years old or older. And the program went from 12 years old to 21. That's what ages they would accept. And the reason I wouldn't let my cadet instructors be younger than 17 is because lots of people were watching this thing from the outside, and hazing was a big deal, right? That's what they were really, they kind of overdid it. But at any point, I was running through that vein. And so because there's lots of close interaction, lots of opportunities to do stupid things if you weren't watching. And so I told those kids, I said, the reason that you got to be 17 years old is because you don't have to worry about what Civil Air Patrol is going to do if you violate these things. You're going to have to worry about what the state of Texas does to you, because it's called child endangerment. It's a first-degree felony in the state of Texas. And if you willingly or even accidentally do something stupid with these kids in here, you're going to deal with the real law.
Yeah.
CAP is not even going to be a blip on the radar. And it was because of that very issue. If you want to be here, it is very serious.
Right.
And the kingdom is very serious in this regard.
And that's the tone he had.
I think that is the tone. He's not, in one sense, it looks like he's beating them up, but on the other end, he's going, well, and that's kind of what we're going to talk about. Why would you do these things? Well, God has poured out everything he is on you, and you got to learn how to quit looking at it from this kind of wisdom and look at it at this kind of wisdom.
Exactly. Well, and one of the, some weird clicking going on over there. One of the things that is important to note in this church and in the Ephesian church at Ephesus, these Gentiles were coming into the faith and bringing in these pagan practices that they had in their pagan worship, as it were, and it was infiltrating. I mean, we have the same kind of stuff happening now.
Oh yeah.
And so he's addressing some of that, but his tone is not addressing it out of like you didn't know any better. He's addressing it out of you should have known better, because Christ has given you everything. You don't need to go out and do this or to do that or to seek this or to whatever it is. And we'll get into all of that as we get into chapters 10, 11, 12 on in through 14. With where they were abusing the spirit gifts and things. He's like trying to rattle them at the front end, going, you have everything, you know, that you need and should be doing better. And that's, do you want to jump into what, 18 is what we were talking about, or do you want to back up some?
Well, so in verse 18, this is the CSB. Let no one deceive himself. If anyone among you thinks he is wise in this age, let him become a fool, so that he can become wise. For the wisdom of this world is foolishness with God. Since it is written, he catches the wise in their craftiness. And again, the Lord knows that the reasonings of the wise are futile. He's not talking about wisdom as futile. He's talking about looking at it from the way a man decides things. Yeah. And so he's coming back on that, because in the very beginning of this, he was talking about, he comes in and it looks like we're talking about, well, I agree with Paul on this point of view, because I think this and this and this, and he's on me, me and him are on that same page. There's something wrong with you in the way you're dealing with stuff. Yeah, well, that's not what Apollos said. And the goofy thing about that is, we don't know who Apollos is.
Right.
His name's popped up once or twice in places, but it's just kind of like this in passing thing. It's kind of like, Ananias, the guy that went to see Paul after he'd been knocked down off the horse. We didn't know who Ananias was. We know the bad Ananias, but it's not the same guy.
Right.
And that guy was a serious player in the kingdom. I can tell you that he was, or we would have never seen that.
Well, and not only would we have never seen it, it wouldn't have made the record, but the fact that the Lord spoke to him this very difficult thing.
A conversation just like we read with Moses.
Yeah, like, are you sure about this?
So don't miss that part, because Paul, he's all over these books, and we're looking at it from, here's the Bible, and everybody knows who Paul is, even the most heathen on the planet. But when Paul says, why are you talking about Apollos like that? In Paul's mind, Apollos is as big of a player as he is, if he was measuring it like that. And he even says Cephas, Peter.
Yeah.
And of course, we can accept Peter, but don't miss the fact that Apollos' name is in here, and he's the guy that's in there teaching them how to walk and talk and act.
He was the waterer.
Yeah, to use those words in the scripture, but it's easy for us just to kind of pass over that thing.
Yeah.
But my point is that when one stands on one side and one stands on the other, the people knew the depth of who those guys were.
Well, and there's some things that you can glean from looking at this that may or not seem explicit, but apparently Paul and Apollos had some sort of a different approach to things.
Oh, sure they did.
Obviously.
We have a different approach to things.
Yes, I'm right, you're wrong. It's a good relationship. But because there was a foundation for one group to say, I like what Apollos is doing better versus what Paul is doing. And so whatever that looks like, it doesn't really say what those were, but it was different. And later on, we'll get to it later on in some of these other chapters and verses, is that Paul did not, you used the phrase, he didn't measure it that way. And that's what he's really focusing on here.
Yes.
Is that the reason that there were people saying, I'm a Paul and I'm a Apollos, is because they were looking at it with the wisdom of men.
Yes,
they
that's
were
where
looking
I was
at
going.
it through the eyes of human. And people, I've had somebody say to me, why are you always talking about kingdom vision? What do you mean? And it simply means looking at the world, your worldview, your church view, your Christian view, everything through the eyes of how does the kingdom see this? How does God see this? How does it tie into the kingdom, not into man? And when we start doing it, according to verse 18, and here's the deal. He's like, don't deceive yourself. It's not that they were being deceived from the outside. They were just bringing their humanity into it. That's all it was.
Yeah.
And he says, don't be deceived, or don't deceive yourself. If anyone among you thinks he's wise in this age, and that's an important thing.
Yes, it is. That's a big word right there.
And how, I've been thinking about how would I say that in, hey, Danny Grindell, is that how you say your name? I hope that's right. Grindele? I don't know. You'll correct me on the comments maybe. But what was I saying? Oh, wisdom of men. What was I saying? I got so distracted by the stream because I'm running the stream today.
Yeah, trying to do too many things at once. No, here's where you're doing. The wisdom of men. So, and even we're sitting here talking about trying to say what Paul was saying and what the people were thinking. Well, if you go back and look, Paul's trying to talk to these people, and he's trying to tell them he's probably in a frustrated place because they're just looking at the linear here.
Yeah.
Well, what do you mean? I agree with Apollos. I agree with what he's saying. I don't know that I really see that part, or I don't want to know that. And what he's telling me is that very action is you're depending on your own power to try to see these things, and not even trying to give it the consideration of, well, maybe there is something bigger here. And you stop. You go, oh, well, I can't see that, so I don't. Well, that's where he's saying don't do that part.
Well, I can think of a couple of examples, and I'll give you one biblical example, which would be when Cornelius got saved. Not only just did we use the term got saved, it's in the scripture, but in Western evangelicalism, the term get saved typically means there was a conversion, like said a prayer, whatever. That's typically what most people that we're going to encounter in East Texas are going to believe or characterize it as. But that's really not just what happened to Cornelius. Cornelius received the Holy Spirit poured out on him, on his family. He was already a fearer of God. He, so he needed to hear the gospel. He did. He trusted, and the Spirit came, and they had the Spirit gifts and manifestation on these Gentiles. It was a big deal, and everybody there received it. It wasn't just him. It was a big deal. Peter treks back to the council, and their immediate response was, well, that can't be because he's Gentile. And they got to the edge of their sensibilities, and now they pushed through that.
That's the point.
That's the point. That's exactly right. What these people were doing in the Corinthian church was they were stopping. They weren't pushing through it. They were saying, yeah, but what Apollos was saying, 2 weeks ago at our meeting, that matches what I'm thinking.
Yes.
And so
it's a justification of themselves is what's really happening here.
They're not really saying, I think Paul is better than Apollos so much as they're saying, I know I'm right because Apollos agrees with me.
That's exactly what's happening in this whole scenario.
Right. And then the other group was saying, no, you can't be right because Paul agrees with me. And he's like, y'all are missing the whole thing.
And that's the point of trying to talk to people. This is going to sound bad.
Be nice.
Well, I don't mean it in a condemning fashion. I don't know how to communicate it so that it's really clear. Because I almost think Paul was having the same problem here. Now, when he was talking to the Hebrews, well, I don't know that Paul wrote Hebrews, get into that argument. But whoever was talking to the Hebrews in Hebrews, he really was hammering them hard.
Right.
Simply by comparison functions. I think Paul, this reads like he's, chastising him, and in some sense he is, but I think it's more out of frustration of not knowing how to communicate it. It's almost like I almost see him ready at the verge to turn around and go, Lord, you're going to have to show these people because I can't get it out right.
Yeah.
It's that difference of contrast.
Yeah.
And I say that, and I think you can read that. Especially in the beginnings and as it goes through 4 and 5, chapters 4 and 5, because Paul he's saying you got it all wrong, not like you morons and idiots. Evidently, they had the capacity to minimum start. It's one thing to look at that and go, I want to believe, I agree with you that there's something different here, but how am I supposed to see that? That's at the place where I look at people and say, you're going to have to go get in the face of God of that, because obviously I can't do it, or I'll find somebody to try to do it. But in the end, when men are trying to reason through those things, it's different when you and I sit to reason through something and somebody outside of that that's learning that. That doesn't mean that we've arrived or any of that kind of stuff. And here's my point. So just before this, where he's talking about fire will test what's really happening. So I guess verse 11, for no one can lay, he's still talking about the foundation. He's saying this is what my gift was. This is what I did. For no one can lay any other foundation what has been laid down. That foundation is Jesus Christ. If anyone builds on the foundation with gold, silver, costly stones, hay, wood, or stubble, or straw, each one's work will become obvious. For the day will disclose it, because it will be revealed by fire. The fire will test the quality of each one's work. If anyone's work that he has built survives, he will receive a reward. If anyone's work is burned up, he will experience loss, but he himself will be saved, but only as through fire. I'm not trying to give the great spiritual meaning of what that is. What I'm trying to say, what Paul was saying, if you're going to try to align with me and use that to walk, here's how it's really going to work out. You can build that if you want. And it can look like gold. It can look like strong metal. It can look like rocks. Or it can look like a log cabin or something made out of grass. But when you go stand before the Lord and get in his face, he is talking about the end times, but the kingdom of heaven is at hand. He's talking about when you deal with God right here where you're at, and you take, look at what I brought you, Lord.
Yeah.
And if it all of a sudden goes, even if it was made out of what you think is strong stuff, you're going to be standing there going, but I and he doesn't, It's not. It's
Yeah.
not like it's the wrath of God cutting your head off, but it's not true.
Right. Well, I think part of the contrast for us is he's saying that you're self-deceiving because you're looking at things, whatever the things
Yeah.
were, with the wisdom of the age, the things that make sense. One flavor of this is what we joke about all the time, where you got deacons around the table. Well, we've never done it that way before, and that's kind of a baby way of looking at it.
But
Or
it does work.
but it's he's like, because the response to that would be, you can't see it because your manly eyes, your human eyes, your wisdom of the age tells you it won't work because it hasn't worked before, or it won't work because it didn't work for that guy. Now, the flip side of that can be true too. You can say, well, whatever this is, whatever this thing is, it'll absolutely work for us because it worked for that church over there. And it's not necessarily, that's the
That
wisdom
is
of the
not-
age.
Yes, that is wisdom of the age.
One of the things that I've always fussed about, and I guess I fuss a lot, but I've always fussed about, is going to like pastors' conferences and things, especially the big ones. And there's always somebody, they're a blogger, they're a this, or they're a that, and how to go from 250 to 2,000 in 6 months. And I've seen a little less of that, but there's always somewhere, some flavor of that. And I'm always in there, in the breakout sessions, raising my hand going, hey, how does this work when you got 40? And that's everybody within a 30-mile radius.
Right.
How do we bring in 2,000 people with infrastructure for housing and sewage and electrical? What's your plan for that? And, and honestly, I've had guys tell me things like, well, maybe it's time to join with another church because you're too small. And that's the only concept they can't even bring to themselves, to understand a concept of faithful ministry in a context that's outside of what they know, because they're wise in the wisdom of this age.
They kind of, all of us do it.
Yeah.
We'll be going along great, and next thing you know, we're trying to pull the other end. That's a constant walk, and a matured individual understands that. And it doesn't mean you're going to be right all the time. It means that you catch yourself quicker, is what maturity means in that, and you make changes. So we talk about having a perfect heart toward the Lord. So what does it mean to have a perfect heart toward the Lord? And how do you even understand what Paul's talking about here? So in my own experience, I learned this thing, but kind of like what I was talking to you about, is that I'll build something and think it's kingdomly and all that, and I'm standing there all puffed up, and all of a sudden it gets destroyed by the truth. That's how I had to start learning it. God would humble me, and has on many occasions. Not like humbling me, like, get away from me, you're not like that. It is more of a fatherly chastisement where, I'll feel humiliated and all the above adjectives. But if your heart's perfect, you learn.
Yeah.
And not to keep an elevated state, but just because you're God, and that's where I love to be.
Well, and the difference for me is, a mark of maturity is pursuing the truth of the kingdom, not pursuing to be proven correct.
Right, but sometimes you have to go through a lesson to start seeing what that is.
Well, and that's what he says. He says, blah, 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 verse 18. If anyone among you thinks he is wise in this age, let him become a fool so that he can become wise. Well, that sounds like one of those weird ancient Egyptian proverbs or something, It's like Confucius say, it's not Egyptian, but, Chinese proverb or whatever. And, Confucius say, if you stand in water, feet get wet, or whatever. And you're like, you're reading it like, what in the world? But what he's saying is it's an intentional act of discipline to not evaluate situations, things, people, whatever, according to what think the wisdom of the age. It's an intentional, I know what it looks like, I know what my gut says, my flesh says, even my experience says. Yeah. But what is it that the kingdom is saying? And he's saying in this passage, you ought to be able to do that. And he's going to say in a minute, in the next chapter or two, the reason you can do that is because Christ has given you everything.
Yes.
You don't, you don't have to settle for the wisdom of this age. You can prosper in the wisdom of the kingdom because you have it. It's like
Yeah.
When In-N-Out Burger came, maybe YouTube will mute this, but everybody went crazy. There was lines around the blocks. We went up to the first, In-N-Out Burger. I got a burger. I was so disappointed.
I'm kind of like that with Chick-fil-A.
That's Jesus chicken. You need to back off Jesus chicken.
I love them. I love their model, but I'm not crazy about their food.
but my thing is it's like, I don't know, think of the best hamburger you could ever eat. The gourmet, thick patty, cooked to your liking. It's a half pound of meat, fresh vegetables, and you're like, would you rather have that or the number 2 special from McDonald's?
Yeah.
And which will kill you. I'm probably going to get sued for defamation. But there was a documentary that said if you eat too much of it, it's not good for you. It's fried food, blah, blah, blah. So somebody...
Well, ants won't even eat it.
But and looking at myself in the screen, I should not say anything about fast food and what you should and shouldn't eat. But
yeah,
my point is if you're giving us, a 16-ounce filet mignon or, the $2 steak from the Dollar Tree, that's kind of the comparison he's making. He said,
yes,
make the choice to not settle for the wisdom of this age, because the wisdom of this age is foolishness.
And God will teach you that wisdom of that age. And it may take a long time. You read about Jacob. I mean, he went through, we know what kind of guy he was. But he was not a coward, and he would respond when God would teach him and show him things.
Right.
In verse 21, it says, so let no one boast in human leaders.
Well, before you even jump in there, he says there's a reason for this, is back in 19, because after he says it's foolishness, he catches the wisdom in their craftiness.
Yes.
No matter how wise someone is in the things of this world, the things of humanity, the things that make sense, all of the logic, God catches him in it. You can't outsmart and wise. You can't outwisdom God.
Because we speak in terms of logic with almost like a capital L logic. Like
logic
it makes perfect sense, so it must be God's logic. Man can't even comprehend God's logic.
Right.
And that doesn't mean it's out there that you can't get a hold of it in this age in life. We'll get glimpses and pieces of it. And some people get more of it than others if they'll just let go. And I say that not chastisingly. I'm in the same place. But I do recognize it when I see it. And so, but we're so scared. Well, obviously this is logic or order or whatever. We've talked a little bit about that. And when he says, yeah, so he says in 19, he says he catches the wise in their craftiness. And that's what I'm talking about. When you've just decided, I don't really want to see the real logic anymore because it's too hard to grasp. I'm speaking from personal experience here. I didn't study in the Word for some time because I could see so much of it, but I didn't know what to do with it. So it was overwhelming me. Yeah. But it was overwhelming me because I was trying to make it cram into my physical self here so that I could get a hold of it.
Into the wisdom of what you
instead of just letting it flow how it was going to do. And so, and then he says in 20, and again, the Lord knows that the reasoning of the wise is futile. He's telling you, but I'm trying to get a hold of it. And Paul's going, I know, but that's futile. and so it's going back and forth.
And I'm in a theology class right now. Like I've said, getting ready for to go to the doctoral program, and we're in these discussion boards. And right now we're discussing different theories of the atonement, and it's gotten into.
Oh, wow.
He pushed back on him, and I said, but you're not actually disagreeing with me. You're disagreeing with these. Is it Ezekiel or Exodus 33?
It says
it's Exodus. That God will have mercy on whom He has mercy. It's then quoted again in Romans 9, and I was like, it literally states that in the text.